Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The fluorescent lights of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit hummed with an almost hypnotic rhythm as Special Agent Miranda Chen stared at the crime scene photographs spread across her desk like a macabre tarot reading. Each image told the same horrifying story, yet revealed nothing about the storyteller. 3 victims, 3 different states, 3 identical execution methods, but absolutely no connection between the victims themselves. It was 3:47 a.m. on a rain-soaked Thursday morning in Quantico, Virginia, and Chen had been awake for 36 hours straight. The coffee had long since stopped working, replaced by pure adrenaline, and the gnawing certainty that somewhere out there, another victim was already marked for death. The first body had been discovered in a storage unit in Portland, Oregon, exactly 43 days ago. Rebecca Martinez, 28, a pediatric nurse with no criminal record, no enemies, and no reason to be found with her hands bound behind her back with surgical tubing. Her mouth sealed with medical tape, and 3 precise incisions made behind her left ear in the shape of a perfect triangle. The Portland police had initially treated it as an isolated incident until the second body turned up in Boise, Idaho, 18 days later. David Kim, 34, an accountant who'd never even received a speeding ticket, found in his basement workshop under identical circumstances. Same binding material, same tape, same 3 triangular cuts, same positioning of the body. The Idaho State Police had reached out to Portland immediately, and within hours, both cases had been escalated to the FBI. But it was the 3rd victim that had sent shockwaves through the Bureau's upper echelons. Dr. Sarah Whitman, 41, a forensic pathologist from Minneapolis, Minnesota, discovered in her own autopsy suite with the killer's signature carved into her neck. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. This unsub was taunting law enforcement directly, demonstrating that no one was beyond his reach, not even those who spent their lives examining the dead. Chen rubbed her tired eyes and picked up the victimology report for the 100th time. Rebecca Martinez had been adopted at birth. David Kim had immigrated from South Korea as a child. Dr. Whitman had been born in Minneapolis, but had spent her teenage years in foster care. 3 different backgrounds, 3 different professions, 3 different life paths that somehow converged at the same horrific end. The killer's method was surgical in its precision. Each victim had been sedated with a combination of propofol and midazolam, drugs that required medical knowledge to administer safely. The incisions were made with what the medical examiner believed to be a number 15 scalpel blade, wielded by someone with extensive anatomical knowledge. Most disturbing of all, the victims had been kept alive for approximately 8 to 12 hours after their initial capture, based on the bruising patterns and the settling of the sedatives in their bloodstream. Agent Chen's phone buzzed against the desk, startling her from her analysis. The caller ID showed Denver Field Office. "Chen here," she answered, already knowing what she was about to hear. "Agent Chen, this is Assistant Director Walsh in Denver. We've got another one." The words hit her like a physical blow. Victim number 4. The pattern was accelerating. "Same signature?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Identical. White male, 37 years old, found in a rented storage facility about 2 hours ago. Name's Marcus Thompson, works as a high school biology teacher. No criminal record, exemplary citizen by all accounts. Local ME is saying the body's been there for approximately 18 hours. Chen was already reaching for her jacket. I'll be on the next flight out. Don't let anyone contaminate the scene, and I want a complete media blackout until I get there. Already done. One more thing, Chen. There was something else this time. The killer left a note. Chen's blood ran cold. Serial killers rarely broke pattern to communicate directly with law enforcement unless they were escalating toward some kind of endgame. What did it say? 3 words. You're too slow. The flight to Denver gave Chen time to review everything they knew about their unsub. She'd constructed a preliminary profile based on the first 3 murders, but the addition of a 4th victim and direct communication was forcing her to reconsider several key assumptions. The killer was almost certainly male, based on the physical strength required to move and position the victims. He possessed advanced medical knowledge, either through formal education or extensive self-study. The surgical precision suggested a background in medicine, veterinary science, or possibly mortuary science. The choice to use storage facilities and isolated locations indicated careful planning and an intimate knowledge of each city's layout. But what troubled Chen most was the seeming randomness of victim selection. She'd spent years studying serial killers, and one universal truth was that they never selected victims randomly. There was always a pattern, always a connection, even if it took months or years to identify. As the plane descended toward Denver International Airport, Chen found herself thinking about the triangular incisions. The triangle was one of the most ancient symbols known to humanity, representing everything from the Christian Trinity to the elements of fire, water, and earth in various pagan traditions. But in this context, what could it mean? Her phone rang again as she collected her luggage. It was Dr. James Morrison, the FBI's chief behavioral analyst and Chen's mentor for the past 7 years. Miranda, I just reviewed the Denver crime scene photos. We need to talk. I'm heading to the scene now. What did you find? It's not what I found. It's what I remembered. 23 years ago, there was a series of murders in the Pacific Northwest with a remarkably similar signature. Same triangular cuts, same medical precision, same seemingly random victim selection. The case went cold after the killer simply stopped. Chen felt her heart rate accelerate. Why wasn't this flagged in VICAP? Because officially, the cases were never connected. 3 different jurisdictions, each convinced they were dealing with a local killer. The detective who suspected a connection died in a car accident before he could prove it. What was his name? Detective Robert Chen, your father. The words hit Chen like a sledgehammer. She'd known her father had died in a car accident when she was 12 years old, but she'd never known the specific details of what case he'd been working on. Her mother had always said he'd died investigating a burglary, and Chen had never had reason to question that story. Dr. Morrison, are you telling me that this killer has been active for over 2 decades? I'm telling you that your father was murdered because he got too close to the truth. And now, 23 years later, the same killer is back. The question is, what made him start killing again, and why is he accelerating his timeline? Chen stood in the middle of Denver International Airport, surrounded by the bustle of travelers, feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew about her family, her father's death, and her own career path was suddenly cast in a different light. There's something else, Morrison continued. I pulled your father's old case files from storage. Each of the victims from 1998 had been adopted, immigrated to the U.S. as children, or spent time in foster care, just like our current victims. The pattern was finally beginning to emerge, but it brought with it a terrifying realization. This wasn't a serial killer selecting random victims. This was someone with access to deeply personal, often sealed records. Someone who could identify people whose backgrounds had been deliberately obscured or altered. Someone with access to government databases or social services records. Chen hailed a taxi and gave the driver the address of the storage facility where Marcus Thompson's body had been found. As the city skyline passed by outside the window, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking directly into a trap that had been 23 years in the making. The storage facility was a sprawling complex of orange metal buildings on the outskirts of Denver, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. 3 FBI vehicles and 2 coroner's vans were parked outside Unit 247, their red and blue lights casting eerie shadows in the early morning darkness. Agent Sarah Martinez from the Denver field office met Chen at the perimeter tape. Martinez was young, probably fresh out of Quantico, with the eager efficiency of someone determined to prove herself. "Agent Chen? I'm Agent Martinez. I've been coordinating with local law enforcement to secure the scene. The body is in the same position as the others. Hands bound behind the back, surgical tape over the mouth, positioned on his back with arms at his sides." Chen nodded, pulling on latex gloves and booties. "Has anyone been inside the unit besides the ME?" "Just the responding officers and the medical examiner. We've photographed everything exactly as it was found. The victim's car was discovered about 2 miles away in a shopping mall parking lot." Chen ducked under the yellow tape and approached the storage unit. The metal roll-up door was raised, revealing a 10 by 10 space that had been transformed into a grotesque tableau. Marcus Thompson lay in the center of the concrete floor, his body positioned with the same ritualistic precision as the previous victims. The fluorescent light fixture had been turned on, casting harsh shadows that made the scene even more disturbing. But it was what surrounded the body that made Chen's blood run cold. Pinned to the walls of the storage unit were dozens of photographs. Surveillance photos of Rebecca Martinez, David Kim, Dr. Sarah Whitman, and Marcus Thompson. But there were others as well. Photos of people Chen didn't recognize, all bearing the same composition. Candid shots taken from a distance, showing the subjects going about their daily lives, completely unaware they were being watched. And there, in the center of the display, was a photograph of Special Agent Miranda Chen herself, taken outside her apartment building in Arlington, Virginia, just 3 days ago. Below the photograph was a handwritten note in precise block letters. "Some patterns skip generations. Your father understood, do you?" Chen's hands trembled as she read the note. This killer hadn't just resumed his activities after a 23-year hiatus. He'd been watching, waiting, planning. The 4 recent murders weren't random acts of violence. They were a message, a calling card designed to draw her into the investigation. "Agent Martinez, I need you to contact Quantico immediately. Tell them to put Agent Miranda Chen's apartment under immediate surveillance, and to issue a BOLO for anyone matching our unsub profile in the Arlington area." "Yes, ma'am. Should I also coordinate with local law enforcement to—" Chen's phone rang, interrupting Martinez mid-sentence. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Special Agent Chen? This is Dr. Patricia Holbrook at Denver General Hospital. I'm calling about a patient who was brought in about an hour ago. He's been asking specifically for the FBI agent investigating the storage unit murders. He says he has information about the killer, but he'll only speak to Miranda Chen." Chen felt a chill run down her spine. "What's the patient's condition?" "He's in critical condition in our ICU. Multiple lacerations, severe blood loss, signs of prolonged torture. But Agent Chen, there's something else. He has 3 triangular incisions behind his left ear, fresh ones. It looks like our killer's signature, but this victim is still alive." The drive to Denver General took 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. Chen's mind raced through the implications of a surviving victim. In over 23 years of killings, no one had ever survived an encounter with this unsub. The fact that Marcus Thompson had been found dead while another victim lay dying in a hospital bed suggested a dramatic change in the killer's methodology. Dr. Holbrook met Chen at the ICU entrance. She was a woman in her 50s with prematurely gray hair and the steady demeanor of someone who'd spent decades dealing with trauma cases. "Agent Chen, I should warn you, the patient is barely conscious, and his condition is deteriorating rapidly. We've given him blood transfusions and stabilized his vital signs, but the damage is extensive. Whatever this person did to him, it was methodical and prolonged." Chen followed Dr. Holbrook through a maze of sterile corridors to room 314. Through the observation window, she could see a man in his early 40s lying in the hospital bed, his face and arms covered with bandages, multiple IV lines running into his arms. "He's been drifting in and out of consciousness for the past hour," Dr. Holbrook explained. "But every time he wakes up, he asks for you specifically. He seems to know details about the case that haven't been released to the public." Chen entered the room quietly, approaching the bedside with caution. The patient's eyes fluttered open as she drew near, and she could see they were filled with a mixture of pain and desperate urgency. "Agent Chen?" His voice was barely a whisper, his throat raw from screaming. "I'm here. What's your name?" Thomas Mitchell. I know who's killing them." Chen leaned closer, pulling out her digital recorder. "Thomas, I need you to tell me everything you remember. Start from the beginning." Thomas Mitchell's eyes focused on Chen with visible effort. "He took me 3 days ago. From the parking garage at my office. I worked for the Department of Social Services, Children's Division." The connection hit Chen like a lightning bolt. Social services. Access to adoption records, foster care files, immigration documentation. This was how the killer was selecting his victims. "He kept me in a basement somewhere, industrial area, the smell of chemicals. He kept asking me about files from the 1990s, adoption records that had been sealed. He wanted to know about a specific case, a little girl who'd been placed with a family in Virginia." Chen's heart pounded as the pieces began falling into place. "Did he mention any names?" "Chen." "He kept saying the name Chen. Said the girl's adoptive father had been a police detective. Said he'd been getting too close to the truth and had to be eliminated." The room seemed to spin around Chen as the full scope of the killer's plan became clear. Her father hadn't died in a random car accident. He'd been murdered because his investigation was threatening to expose a conspiracy that went far deeper than anyone had imagined. "Thomas, I need you to tell me anything else you remember about where you were held. Any sounds, smells, anything that might help us locate this place." Thomas Mitchell's breathing became more labored, and the monitors beside his bed began beeping more rapidly. Airport, could hear planes taking off. And there was something else. Photos on the wall, dozens of them. People who looked like they could be related. All with the same facial structure, the same bone structure. Dr. Holbrook stepped forward, checking the monitors with growing concern. "Agent Chen, his blood pressure is dropping rapidly. Whatever you need to ask him, you need to ask it now." Chen gripped Thomas Mitchell's hand. "Thomas, did the killer say anything about why he was doing this? What he was looking for?" Mitchell's eyes locked onto hers with sudden clarity. He said the adoption agency was a front, that children were being placed with specific families for a reason. He called it the program. Said your father found out about it and that's why he had to die." The monitors flatlined as Thomas Mitchell's body went limp. Dr. Holbrook and a team of nurses immediately began CPR, but Chen could see in their faces that it was too late. The only person who could have provided direct testimony about the killer was gone. But his words had given Chen the breakthrough she needed. This wasn't just about a serial killer with a medical background. This was about a conspiracy involving illegal adoptions, possibly human trafficking, and the systematic elimination of anyone who got too close to the truth. Chen stepped out of the hospital room and immediately called Dr. Morrison at Quantico. "Morrison, I need you to pull every file related to adoption agencies operating in the Pacific Northwest during the 1990s. Cross-reference them with any FBI investigations into human trafficking or illegal placement schemes. And Morrison, I think my father was killed because he discovered that I was one of the children placed through this program." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds before Morrison responded. "Miranda, are you saying you think you were adopted through this conspiracy?" "I'm saying I think that's exactly what our unsub wants me to believe. Whether it's true or not is irrelevant. He's using it to manipulate me into a confrontation. The question is, are we walking into his trap, or are we finally going to catch him?" Chen left Denver General Hospital with more questions than answers. But for the first time since the investigation began, she felt like she was finally seeing the killer's true pattern. This wasn't about random murders. It was about covering up a decades-old conspiracy by eliminating anyone who might expose it. As she drove back toward the storage facility to collect more evidence, Chen couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every car in her rearview mirror seemed suspicious. Every shadow could be hiding a threat. The killer had been planning this confrontation for 23 years, and now she was walking directly into the center of his web. But Chen had spent her entire career studying predators, learning their patterns, understanding their motivations. And if this killer thought he could manipulate her through fear and psychological games, he was about to learn that he'd chosen the wrong FBI agent to target. The real question wasn't whether she could catch him. It was whether she could do it before he claimed another victim. And based on the escalating timeline and the personal nature of his threats, Chen suspected she was running out of time. The storage facility was still bustling with forensic activity when Chen returned. Agent Martinez approached her with an evidence bag containing several photographs that had been removed from the walls of Unit 247. "Agent Chen, we found something else. Hidden behind one of the photos was this." Martinez handed Chen a small manila envelope with her name written on it in the same precise block letters as the previous note. Inside was a single photograph. A 7-year-old Asian girl standing outside an elementary school in Arlington, Virginia, dated September 1985. On the back was written, "Some truths are worth killing for." Chen stared at the photograph, recognizing her younger self despite the passage of 23 years. The killer had been tracking her since childhood, waiting for the right moment to draw her into his game. But as she looked at the photograph, Chen noticed something that filled her with cold determination rather than fear. In the background of the image, partially obscured by a tree, was the reflection of the photographer in a car window. It was blurry and indistinct, but it was something. The killer had made his first mistake in over 2 decades. "Agent Martinez, I need this photograph analyzed by the best forensic imaging specialists we have. If we can enhance this reflection, we might finally have a face to go with our profile." Chen's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Quantico. "Tomorrow, 3 a.m. Come alone or more, people die." The killer was done playing games. After 23 years of careful planning, he was ready for the final confrontation. And despite every protocol screaming at her not to walk into an obvious trap, Chen knew she had no choice. Too many people had already died because of her father's investigation, and she wasn't going to let anyone else become a victim. As she drove back toward the airport to catch the red-eye flight to Washington, D.C., Chen couldn't help but think about her father. Had he felt this same mixture of fear and determination when he'd gotten close to the truth? Had he known that his investigation would eventually put his daughter in danger? One thing was certain. Tomorrow at Quantico, one way or another, this 23-year pattern of killing was going to end. Special Agent Jake Morrison pressed his back against the cold concrete wall of the abandoned warehouse, his heart hammering against his ribs as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the cavernous space. 6 months of undercover work with the Castellano crime family had led to this moment, and everything hung in the balance of the next few minutes. The warehouse sat on the industrial outskirts of Baltimore, Maryland, its broken windows and rusted exterior providing perfect camouflage for the operation that had been running beneath the FBI's radar for almost 3 years. What had started as a routine investigation into illegal gambling had uncovered something far more sinister. A sophisticated network of human trafficking and organ harvesting that stretched from the ports of Baltimore to the private medical facilities of Mexico. Morrison had infiltrated the organization under the identity of Jack Murphy, a former Army medic with a dishonorable discharge and a willingness to ask no questions for the right price. The cover had taken 8 months to establish, complete with fabricated military records, a criminal history constructed by FBI document specialists, and enough authentic details to fool even the most paranoid crime boss. Vincent "Vinny Bones" Castellano ran his operation like a Fortune 500 company, complete with supply chains, quality control, and customer service. The only difference was that his products were human beings, and his distribution network included some of the most dangerous cartels in Mexico and Guatemala. Murphy. The voice belonged to Tommy Giacalone, Vinny's lieutenant, and the man responsible for keeping Morrison alive for the past 6 months. "Boss wants to see you in the office. Something about a special delivery tonight." Morrison checked his concealed recording device one last time before stepping away from the wall. The wire was barely larger than a thread, woven into the fabric of his jacket by FBI technical specialists. But discovery would mean instant death. Vinny Bones had a reputation for creativity when it came to eliminating problems, and Morrison had seen enough evidence of his handiwork to know that a quick bullet would be a mercy. The office was a converted shipping container in the center of the warehouse, outfitted with bulletproof glass and enough firepower to hold off a small army. Vincent Castellano sat behind a metal desk, his massive frame draped in an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the violence that lurked beneath the surface. At 52 years old, Vinny had survived 3 assassination attempts, 2 federal investigations, and countless turf wars by being smarter, more ruthless, and more paranoid than anyone else in the business. "Jack, my friend, come in, come in." Vinny's voice carried the warm tones of someone greeting a beloved nephew, but Morrison could see the calculation in his eyes. In 6 months of working for the Castellano organization, Morrison had learned that Vinny's friendliness was often the last thing people heard before they disappeared forever. "You got something special for me tonight, Mr. Castellano." Vinny smiled, revealing gold dental work that caught the fluorescent light. "Always straight to business with you, Jack. I like that. No wasted words, no bullshit. Yeah, I got something special. Real special." Morrison kept his expression neutral as Vinny opened a manila folder and spread a series of photographs across the desk. What he saw made his stomach clench with revulsion and rage, but he forced himself to maintain the detached professionalism of Jack Murphy. The photographs showed a series of medical facilities, clean, modern operating rooms that could have been part of any legitimate hospital. But the subjects on the operating tables weren't patients undergoing necessary surgery. They were conscious, terrified people being systematically dismantled by teams of surgeons in unmarked scrubs. Beautiful, ain't it? Vinny's voice carried genuine pride. Took us 3 years to set this up. We got facilities in Tijuana, Guadalajara, and Guatemala City. Clean operations, professional staff, no questions asked. And the beauty of it is, we're providing a service. Rich people need organs, poor people need money. We're just facilitating the transaction. Morrison forced himself to nod appreciatively, while internally cataloging every detail for his eventual testimony. Looks like a hell of an operation. What's my part in tonight's special delivery? Vinny leaned back in his chair, his smile widening. We got a high-priority client flying in from Dubai tonight. Needs a specific match. O, negative blood type, young, healthy, the kind of donor that commands premium prices. We got 3 candidates lined up, but I need someone I trust to handle the transportation. Where are we picking them up? That's the beautiful part. They're coming to us. These 3 idiots answered an ad for a medical study at Johns Hopkins. Thought they were going to make $500 for a weekend of tests. Instead, they're going to make us $50,000 each. Morrison felt his jaw clench involuntarily, but managed to cover it by reaching for a cigarette. The casual way Vinny discussed destroying 3 innocent lives was a stark reminder of the kind of evil that lurked beneath the surface of organized crime. What time's the pickup? Midnight. Black van parked outside the Marriott on Charles Street. They'll be waiting in the lobby, looking for a guy with a medical clipboard. That's you. Tell them the study's been moved to a more secure facility for their safety, then bring them here. Simple as that. Morrison nodded, already formulating a plan to warn his FBI handlers while maintaining his cover. Any backup for this run? Tommy'll be in a follow car just in case, but Jack, this is a test. You handle this right and you're looking at a permanent position with serious benefits. You fuck it up. Vinny's smile disappeared, replaced by the cold expression of a predator. Let's just say we've got space for 4 donors instead of 3. Morrison left the shipping container office with a mixture of determination and dread. In just over 5 hours, 3 innocent people would walk into what they believed was a medical study, only to be transported to their deaths. But Morrison couldn't break his cover to warn them directly without destroying months of investigative work and potentially losing the opportunity to bring down the entire network. Instead, he had to trust in the FBI's ability to coordinate a rescue operation while maintaining the integrity of his undercover identity. It was a delicate balance that could easily result in either the deaths of innocent people or the loss of the most significant organized crime investigation in decades. Morrison's handler, Special Agent Lisa Chen, was waiting for him at a prearranged meeting spot, a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of Baltimore, where the fluorescent lights and constant flow of late-night customers provided perfect cover for a clandestine meeting. "How bad is it?" Chen asked the moment Morrison slid into the booth across from her. "Worse than we thought. This isn't just trafficking. They're running a full-scale organ harvesting operation. Multiple facilities, international clients. And tonight they're planning to kidnap 3 college students who think they're participating in a medical study." Chen's expression grew grim as Morrison relayed the details of his conversation with Vinnie Bones. She made notes on a small pad, occasionally asking for clarification on specific details that would be crucial for coordinating the rescue operation. "Jake, this puts us in an impossible position. We can't let those 3 kids get kidnapped, but if we move too early, we lose the chance to identify all the players in this network. Vinnie Bones is just a middleman. We need to know who's running the facilities, who the clients are, and how the money flows. Morrison lit another cigarette, his hands trembling slightly from the combination of adrenaline and exhaustion. What if we let the pickup happen but intercept the van before it reaches the warehouse? Make it look like a rival gang hit or a police patrol that got lucky. Too risky. If we miss the timing, those kids end up in a Mexican operating room with their organs harvested for some billionaire's transplant surgery. And if we blow your cover, we lose the only intelligence source we have inside this organization. Chen's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the caller ID and answered immediately. "Agent Chen, yes sir. Understood. We'll be ready." She hung up and looked at Morrison with an expression that mixed determination with concern. That was Assistant Director Walsh. He's authorizing a joint operation with the Baltimore PD and the DEA. We're going to set up surveillance on the Marriott and intercept the targets before they can be transported. But, Jake, you're going to have to sell the story that they never showed up. What about the follow car? Tommy's going to be watching everything. We'll handle Tommy. Right now, I need you to focus on maintaining your cover and gathering as much intelligence as possible about the broader network. This is our one shot at bringing down an organization that's been operating with impunity for years. Morrison stubbed out his cigarette and stood to leave. "Lisa, when this goes down tonight, make sure those kids understand how close they came to dying. Maybe it'll convince them to be more careful about answering ads for easy money." The Marriott on Charles Street was an upscale hotel in downtown Baltimore, its modern glass facade and well-lit entrance providing a false sense of security for the 3 college students who waited in the lobby at 11:55 p.m. Morrison sat in the black van across the street, watching through tinted windows as FBI surveillance teams took their positions around the hotel. Agent Chen's voice crackled through his earpiece. "All units in position. Target acquisition in 5 minutes." Morrison climbed out of the van and walked toward the hotel entrance, a medical clipboard in his hand and a false smile on his face. The 3 students, 2 young men and a woman, all in their early 20s, looked up expectantly as he approached. "Excuse me, are you here for the Johns Hopkins medical study?" The young woman nodded eagerly. "Yes, we're supposed to meet Dr. Patterson at midnight." "I'm Doctor Patterson's research assistant. There's been a change of plans. We've had to move the study to a more secure facility due to some security concerns. If you'll come with me, we have transportation waiting outside." Morrison felt sick to his stomach as he led the 3 students toward the hotel exit, knowing that in any other circumstances he would be delivering them to their deaths. But as they stepped outside into the cool Baltimore night air, everything went according to plan. FBI agents disguised as Baltimore police officers approached from 3 different directions, their weapons drawn but not immediately visible to the students. "FBI, everyone on the ground, now!" The students dropped to their knees in confusion and terror, while Morrison raised his hands in feigned surprise. "What the hell is going on here?" "Sir, step away from the students and put your hands behind your head." The lead FBI agent, who Morrison recognized as Agent Williams from the Baltimore field office, played his part perfectly. As Morrison was led away in handcuffs, which would be removed as soon as they were out of sight, he heard Agent Williams explaining to the confused students that they had been targeted by kidnappers and that the medical study they thought they were participating in was a complete fabrication. From the follow car parked 2 blocks away, Tommy Giacalone watched the entire scene unfold with growing anger and suspicion. When Morrison was released 20 minutes later in an alley behind the hotel, after being processed and supposedly cleared of any involvement, Tommy was waiting for him with questions. "What the fuck happened back there, Murphy?" Morrison lit a cigarette with hands that shook just enough to sell the story. "Hell if I know. Those kids must have been tipped off somehow. Maybe one of them got spooked and called the cops. All I know is I'm lucky to be walking away from this instead of sitting in a federal holding cell. Tommy's eyes narrowed as he studied Morrison's face. Boss ain't gonna be happy about this. He specifically told you not to fuck this up. Hey, I did exactly what Vinny told me to do. I approached them with the medical story. I tried to lead them to the van. It's not my fault they had federal agents watching them. The drive back to the warehouse was tense, with Tommy repeatedly glancing at Morrison as if trying to detect signs of deception. Morrison knew that his survival depended on selling the story perfectly. Any hint that he had been involved in setting up the FBI operation would result in his immediate execution. Vincent Castellano was waiting for them in his shipping container office, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by cold fury. "Jack, explain to me how a simple pickup turned into a federal fucking operation." Morrison took a deep breath and prepared to deliver the performance of his life. "Mr. Castellano, I think someone in the Johns Hopkins medical department tipped off the FBI. Those kids were expecting to meet Dr. Patterson, which means someone inside the hospital knew about our operation." Vinny's eyes blazed with anger, but it wasn't directed at Morrison. "You think we got a leak in our medical contacts?" "Had to be. There's no other way the FBI could have known exactly when and where to set up their operation. They were in position before I even approached the targets." Vinny slammed his fist on the metal desk, causing papers and photographs to scatter. 23 years I've been running operations in this city without a single major bust. Now we got federal agents crawling, all over what should have been a routine pickup. Morrison sensed an opportunity to gather more intelligence. "Maybe we should shut down the Baltimore operation for a while. Focus on the facilities in Mexico until things cool down here." "Can't do that. We got 3 high-priority clients flying in next week, including the Dubai contact and a guy from Switzerland who's been waiting 6 months for a specific match. We cancel on them, and word gets out that we can't deliver. Our reputation gets destroyed, and this whole network falls apart." Tommy spoke up from the corner of the shipping container. "Boss, what if we use the backup medical contacts? The ones who run the private clinic in Annapolis?" Vinny considered this for several moments before nodding slowly. "Yeah, that could work. Jack, I want you to drive down to Annapolis tomorrow and meet with Dr. Sarah Kessler. She runs a fertility clinic that's been helping us identify potential donors. Tell her we need 3 replacements by the end of the week." Morrison felt his blood run cold as he realized the scope of the operation. They weren't just targeting random people who answered fake medical study ads. They had legitimate medical professionals identifying potential victims based on their blood types, medical histories, and personal circumstances. "Dr. Kessler expects a specific payment for her referrals," Vinny continued. $25,000 per donor, plus a bonus if they match our client's specific requirements. You'll be carrying $50,000 in cash, so I want you armed and careful." The meeting ended with Morrison receiving detailed instructions for the Annapolis contact, including code words and specific procedures for identifying legitimate donors. As Morrison left the warehouse, he couldn't shake the image of Dr. Sarah Kessler, a fertility specialist who was supposed to be helping couples start families, instead serving as a talent scout for organ harvesting. The drive to Annapolis the following morning gave Morrison time to process the full scope of what he'd uncovered. This wasn't just a local crime family running illegal operations. It was an international network with connections to legitimate medical facilities, corrupt doctors, and wealthy clients who saw human beings as nothing more than spare parts. Agent Chen met him at a rest stop outside Annapolis to coordinate the approach to Dr. Kessler's clinic. "We've been running surveillance on the Chesapeake Fertility Center for the past 12 hours, she reported. Dr. Kessler appears to be running a legitimate practice, but we've identified several patients who match the profile of previous trafficking victims. How do you want to handle this? We're going to let you make the initial contact while we monitor from nearby positions. If we can establish that Dr. Kessler is actively participating in the trafficking network, we'll have grounds for a warrant to search her patient files and financial records. Morrison nodded, checking his concealed recording equipment one final time. What about the $50,000 in cash? Vinny's expecting me to deliver payment for 3 new donors. We'll provide marked bills. If Dr. Kessler accepts payment for identifying victims, it'll give us concrete evidence of conspiracy to commit kidnapping and trafficking. The Chesapeake Fertility Center was housed in a modern medical building overlooking the Severn River. Its pristine waiting room filled with hopeful couples and pregnancy magazines. Morrison approached the reception desk with the briefcase containing the marked bills, using the code words Vinny had provided. I'm here to see Dr. Kessler about a special consultation. Mr. Castellano referred me. The receptionist's demeanor changed instantly at the mention of Castellano's name. Of course, sir. Dr. Kessler is expecting you. Please follow me to her private office. Dr. Sarah Kessler was a woman in her early 50s with the polished appearance of a successful medical professional. But as Morrison entered her office and she carefully closed the door behind him, he could see the nervousness in her eyes. Mr. Murphy, I assume? Vincent told me you'd be coming by. I understand you need 3 specific matches by the end of the week. Morrison set the briefcase on her desk and opened it to reveal the stacks of marked bills. Mr. Castellano wants to make sure you understand how important this is. We've had some complications with our usual sources. Dr. Kessler's eyes widened at the sight of the money, and Morrison could see her internal struggle between medical ethics and financial greed. After several moments, greed won. I have 3 patients who fit your requirements perfectly. Young, healthy, O-negative blood types, and all of them are going through difficult financial situations that would make them receptive to participating in a paid medical study. Morrison felt his stomach churn as Dr. Kessler pulled out 3 patient files and spread them across her desk. Each file contained detailed medical information, blood test results, and personal background information about women who had come to her seeking help with fertility issues. This one, she said, pointing to a file labeled Jessica Torres, age 24, is a graduate student with significant student loan debt. She's been trying to conceive for 18 months with no success. I could easily convince her that participating in a research study would help both her financial situation and provide valuable medical insights. Morrison forced himself to nod appreciatively while his hidden recording device captured every word. What about the others? Amanda Chen, 26, works as a teacher, but has been struggling with medical bills related to her fertility treatments. And Sarah Washington, 23, is a single mother who's been saving money for IVF procedures. All 3 are desperate enough to take risks for the right amount of money. Dr. Kessler closed the files and looked at Morrison expectantly. The usual arrangement is $25,000 per donor, with an additional bonus if they prove to be optimal matches for your client's needs. Morrison reached into the briefcase and counted out $75,000 in marked bills. Mr. Castellano appreciates your discretion and professionalism, Dr. Kessler. When can you have the first donor ready for pickup? Give me 48 hours to make the arrangements. I'll contact Jessica Torres first. She's the most financially desperate and least likely to ask difficult questions. As Morrison left the fertility clinic, he felt a mixture of revulsion and determination. Dr. Kessler's casual willingness to betray her patient's trust for money was a stark reminder of how corruption could infiltrate even the most trusted professions. Agent Chen was waiting for him in the parking lot, disguised as a pharmaceutical sales representative. How did it go? We've got her on tape accepting payment for identifying victims. She's planning to contact the first target within 48 hours. Good work. We'll maintain surveillance on all 3 potential victims while coordinating with the U.S. Attorney's Office to prepare warrants. Jake, I know this is difficult, but we're building a case that could shut down this entire network and save hundreds of lives. The next 48 hours were among the most stressful of Morrison's career. While FBI agents maintained discreet surveillance on Jessica Torres, Amanda Chen, and Sarah Washington, Morrison had to continue his undercover role with the Castellano organization, gathering intelligence about the broader network while knowing that 3 innocent women were being targeted for kidnapping and murder. On Thursday evening, Dr. Kessler called the number Morrison had provided, using a secure phone line that the FBI was monitoring. Mr. Murphy, I've made contact with the first donor. Jessica Torres has agreed to participate in what she believes is a research study on fertility treatments. She'll be at the Annapolis Harbor Hotel tomorrow night at 8 p.m., waiting in the lobby for someone from the research team. Morrison felt his jaw clench as he responded. Excellent work, Doctor. Kessler, Mr. Castellano will be very pleased. What about the other 2? Amanda Chen is scheduled for Saturday, and Sarah Washington for Sunday. Same location, same time. They're all expecting to participate in a weekend study that will pay them $5,000 each. After ending the call, Morrison immediately contacted Agent Chen to coordinate the FBI response. Unlike the previous operation at the Marriott, this time they had advance warning and could set up a more sophisticated sting operation. We're going to let the first pickup attempt proceed, Chen explained during a briefing at the Baltimore field office. But instead of intercepting at the hotel, we're going to follow the transportation to identify the full network. We'll have Jessica Torres replaced by an undercover agent, and we'll track the vehicle to see where they plan to take her. Morrison felt uncomfortable with the plan's complexity. What if something goes wrong? What if they realize it's a setup before we can identify all the players? That's a risk we have to take. This network has been operating for years, and this might be our only chance to map out the entire operation. We'll have backup teams positioned at every stage, but we need to gather as much intelligence as possible. Friday night at the Annapolis Harbor Hotel proceeded exactly as planned. Morrison approached the woman sitting in the lobby, not Jessica Torres, but FBI agent Maria Santos, who had been given enough background information to convincingly play the role of a desperate graduate student. Miss Torres, I'm from the research team. There's been a slight change in location for security purposes, but we have transportation waiting outside. Agent Santos played her part perfectly, expressing appropriate nervousness about the change in plans while allowing Morrison to escort her to the waiting van. Tommy Giacalone was once again serving as backup, following at a discreet distance as they drove toward what Morrison assumed would be the Baltimore warehouse. But instead of heading north toward Baltimore, the van turned south toward Washington, D.C. Morrison felt a chill of apprehension as he realized they were driving into unfamiliar territory, away from the FBI surveillance teams that had been positioned based on the assumption that the warehouse was the intended destination. After an hour of driving through increasingly rural areas of Maryland, the van pulled into the parking lot of what appeared to be an abandoned farm outside the small town of La Plata. Morrison could see several other vehicles already parked around a large barn, and his worst fears were confirmed when he recognized one of them as belonging to Vincent Castellano himself. "Change of plans, Murphy," Tommy announced as they parked near the barn. "Boss decided this operation was too important to handle at the warehouse. We're using a more secure location tonight." Morrison helped Agent Santos out of the van, maintaining his cover while desperately trying to signal their location to any FBI surveillance teams that might be in the area. The barn had been converted into a makeshift medical facility, complete with operating tables, surgical equipment, and several men in scrubs who were clearly not legitimate medical professionals. Vincent Castellano emerged from a corner office as Morrison and Agent Santos entered the barn. "Jack, good work tonight. I want you to meet Dr. Rodriguez, our lead surgeon for this operation." Dr. Rodriguez was a thin man in his 60s, with the nervous demeanor of someone who had compromised his medical ethics so thoroughly that there was no possibility of redemption. He examined Agent Santos with the detached professionalism of someone evaluating livestock. "Excellent specimen," he announced after a brief examination. "Blood type confirmed. Vital signs optimal. We can proceed immediately." Morrison felt his heart racing as he realized that Agent Santos was in immediate danger. The FBI backup teams had no idea where they were, and the medical equipment in the barn suggested that the organ harvesting operation was about to begin. "Mr. Castellano," Morrison said, thinking quickly, "shouldn't we wait for the client to arrive before proceeding? I thought they wanted to verify the quality of the donors personally." Vinny's expression grew suspicious. "What client?" "The organs are being shipped to Mexico tonight for delivery to our contacts in Guadalajara. There's no client coming here." Morrison realized his mistake too late. He had assumed this was a live extraction for a waiting client, but instead it was part of a more systematic operation that harvested organs for later distribution. His question had revealed that he didn't understand the full scope of the network's operations. "Tommy," Vinny said quietly, "I think our friend Jack has been asking too many questions lately." The barn fell silent, except for the hum of the refrigeration units used to preserve harvested organs. Morrison could see Agent Santos tense as she realized their cover had been blown, and he knew they had only seconds before the situation turned violent. Morrison's hand moved instinctively toward the concealed weapon in his jacket, but Tommy was faster, drawing his pistol and pointing it directly at Morrison's chest. "Real slow, Jack. Or whatever your real name is. Take out that gun and put it on the table." As Morrison complied, he could see Agent Santos calculating the distance to the nearest exit, while Dr. Rodriguez and his assistants backed away from what was about to become a crime scene. Vincent Castellano walked slowly toward Morrison, his jovial mask completely gone. 6 months you've been with us, Jack. 6 months of earning my trust, learning my business, meeting my contacts. The question is, are you working for the FBI, the DEA, or just a rival family trying to move in on my territory? Morrison knew that any attempt to maintain his cover was pointless. Tommy had already found his concealed recording device and was holding it up for Vinny to see. "FBI," Morrison said simply. "Special Agent Jake Morrison, badge number 2847. Vinny's laugh was cold and humorless. "Well, Agent Morrison, you've done excellent work. You've identified our medical contacts, our transportation networks, our facilities, and our client base. Unfortunately for you, that information dies with you tonight." But as Vinny raised his own weapon, the barn exploded into chaos. FBI tactical teams crashed through every entrance simultaneously, their automatic weapons and flashbang grenades turning the makeshift medical facility into a war zone. "FBI, everyone on the ground, now!" Morrison threw himself to the floor as gunfire erupted around him, pulling Agent Santos down beside him as FBI agents engaged in a firefight with Tommy and several other armed members of the Castellano organization. The battle lasted less than 3 minutes, ending with Tommy Giacalone dead from multiple gunshot wounds and Vincent Castellano wounded but alive. Dr. Rodriguez and his assistant surrendered immediately, more terrified of federal prison than loyal to their criminal employers. As EMTs treated Vinny's gunshot wounds, he looked up at Morrison with a mixture of respect and hatred. "How the fuck did they find us here?" Morrison smiled for the first time in 6 months. "GPS tracker in the van, audio surveillance through my wire, and satellite tracking of all cell phone signals in the area. Vincent, you've been under federal surveillance since the moment I walked into your warehouse." The raid on the La Plata barn yielded evidence that led to the arrest of 37 individuals across 4 states and 2 countries. Dr. Sarah Kessler was arrested at her fertility clinic the following morning, and her patient files provided evidence that helped the FBI identify and protect dozens of potential victims. The investigation ultimately revealed a network that had been responsible for the deaths of over 200 people and had generated more than $50 million in illegal profits over a 5-year period. Vincent Castellano was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, while Dr. Rodriguez received a 30-year sentence in exchange for his testimony against other medical professionals involved in the network. For Agent Morrison, the successful conclusion of the investigation came with a mixture of satisfaction and psychological trauma. 6 months of pretending to be someone capable of facilitating murder and torture had taken a toll that would require months of therapy to process. But as he wrote his final report on the Castellano investigation, Morrison couldn't help but think about Jessica Torres, Amanda Chen, and Sarah Washington. 3 women who would never know how close they had come to being murdered for their organs, and who were now free to live their lives because a group of federal agents had been willing to risk everything to protect them. The case became a landmark in federal prosecution of international trafficking networks, and Morrison's undercover work was cited as a model for future investigations into organized crime. But for Morrison himself, the real victory was simpler. 3 innocent women were still alive, and a network of killers would never claim another victim. U.S. Marshal Sarah Connor had seen enough death in her 15-year career to know when someone was about to die. The way they held their shoulders, the frequency of their glances toward exits, the unconscious touching of vulnerable areas like the throat or wrists, all telltale signs that prey animals displayed when they sensed a predator nearby. Rebecca Martinez exhibited every single one of these behaviors as she sat across from Connor in the sterile conference room of the federal building in Phoenix, Arizona. What made it worse was that Rebecca was supposed to be safe. She had been living under federal protection for 18 months, with a new identity, a new location, and the full resources of the Witness Security Program protecting her from the people who wanted her dead. But someone had found her anyway. "They know where I am," Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible, despite the fact that they were alone in a soundproof room 3 floors below ground level. "Yesterday, I saw a man taking pictures of my apartment building. Same man I saw outside the grocery store last week. Same man who was sitting in a car across from my work 2 weeks ago." Connor studied the photographs Rebecca had taken with her cell phone, blurry images of a figure in dark clothing who could have been anyone. But Rebecca's terror was genuine, and in Connor's experience, protected witnesses developed an almost supernatural ability to detect threats. "Rebecca, I need you to tell me everything you remember about this man. Height, weight, distinguishing features, anything that might help us identify him." Rebecca Martinez had entered the Witness Security Program after testifying against Vincent Torino, a lieutenant in the Chicago mob who had ordered the execution of 3 federal judges. Her testimony had resulted in Torino's conviction and a life sentence, but it had also made her a target for every criminal organization in the country. The Torino family had put a $2 million bounty on Rebecca's head, and in the 18 months since her testimony, 7 different assassination attempts had been thwarted by federal agencies. Each time, the killers had been caught before they could locate Rebecca. But now it appeared that someone had finally succeeded in breaching the security of the Witness Protection Program. "He's about 6 feet tall, maybe a little shorter," Rebecca continued, her hands trembling as she spoke. "Hispanic, probably Mexican based on his features, but the scary thing is how professional he looks. This isn't some street criminal looking for easy money. This guy moves like military or law enforcement." Connor felt a chill run down her spine. If Rebecca was right about the man's background, it suggested that the Torino family had hired a professional assassin rather than relying on local criminals. Professional killers were exponentially more dangerous because they had the training and resources to penetrate federal security measures. "Rebecca, I want you to gather everything you consider essential. Important documents, medications, anything you can't replace. We're moving you to a secure facility within the hour." "Where? Another safe house that they'll find in a few weeks? Another fake identity that they'll see through in a few months?" Rebecca's voice rose with frustration and fear. "Sarah, I've been running for almost 2 years. I'm tired of being afraid every time I walk out my front door." Connor understood Rebecca's frustration, but she also understood the alternative. Vincent Torino's organization had tortured and murdered witnesses before, often taking days to extract information about other federal investigations before finally killing them. "I know this is difficult, but right now our priority is keeping you alive. Once we identify how they found you, we can take steps to make sure it doesn't happen again." But even as Connor spoke the words, she couldn't shake the growing suspicion that the breach of Rebecca's security had come from inside the federal system itself. The Witness Security Program was supposed to be impenetrable, with information compartmentalized so thoroughly that no single person could compromise a witness's location. Connor's secure phone buzzed with an incoming call from Deputy Chief Inspector Frank Walsh, her supervisor at the U.S. Marshals Service headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. "Connor, we have a problem. Rebecca Martinez isn't the only witness who's been compromised. In the past 72 hours, we've had security breaches involving 3 other protected witnesses in different parts of the country." Connor felt her blood run cold. 3 other witnesses meant this wasn't a random security failure. It was a systematic assault on the Witness Protection Program itself. "What's the status of the other witnesses?" 2 are dead. Maria Santos in Denver and James Wilson in Miami were both killed within hours of being located. Professional hits, no witnesses, no evidence left behind. The 3rd witness, David Chen in Portland, managed to escape, but barely. Connor looked across the table at Rebecca, who was still waiting for answers about her relocation. The knowledge that 2 other protected witnesses had already been murdered made Rebecca's situation exponentially more urgent. "Inspector Walsh, I need immediate relocation authority for Rebecca Martinez, plus a full security audit of everyone with access to her case file. If we have a leak in the system, we need to identify it before more people die. Already authorized. There's a federal facility in Colorado that can house her temporarily while we investigate. But Connor, I need you to understand something. If we don't find this leak quickly, we're going to lose the confidence of every witness we've ever protected. People will stop cooperating with federal investigations if they think we can't keep them safe." The implications of Walsh's statement were staggering. The Witness Security Program was the cornerstone of federal law enforcement's ability to prosecute organized crime, terrorism, and large-scale corruption. If witnesses lost faith in the program's ability to protect them, entire categories of federal crimes would become effectively unprosecutable. Connor ended the call and looked directly at Rebecca. "We're moving you to Colorado tonight. Federal facility, maximum security, completely off the books. But I need you to understand that this situation is bigger than just your case. What do you mean? Someone with access to federal databases is selling witness information to criminal organizations. Until we find that person, no one in the Witness Protection Program is truly safe. The flight to Colorado took place on an unmarked federal aircraft, with Connor and Rebecca accompanied by 2 deputy U.S. Marshals who had been vetted at the highest levels. During the 3-hour flight, Connor reviewed the case files of the other compromised witnesses, looking for patterns that might reveal how their locations had been discovered. Maria Santos had been an accountant for a money laundering operation run by the Russian mob. James Wilson had been a corrupt police detective who had testified against his former colleagues in the Chicago Police Department. David Chen had been an immigration officer who had exposed a human trafficking network. All 4 witnesses had testified in cases involving different criminal organizations, different federal agencies, and different prosecutors. The only common factor was that all 4 cases had been handled by the same federal database system, the Witness Security Electronic Records Management System, known internally as WSERMS. The system was supposed to be secure, with access limited to a small number of federal personnel who had undergone extensive background checks. But someone with access to WSERMS was systematically selling witness information, and they were doing it in a way that maximized the criminal organization's ability to locate and eliminate their targets. The federal facility in Colorado was a converted military base high in the Rocky Mountains, surrounded by dense forest and accessible only by a single mountain road that could be easily monitored and controlled. Connor had used the facility for high-risk witness protection before, and its isolation made it nearly impossible for unauthorized personnel to approach undetected. Rebecca was assigned to a secure apartment within the facility's main building, complete with reinforced windows, multiple escape routes, and 24-hour surveillance. But despite the extensive security measures, Connor could see that Rebecca's faith in the federal government's ability to protect her had been shaken. "How long do I have to stay here?" Rebecca asked as Connor showed her around the apartment. "Until we identify and arrest whoever is selling witness information. Could be days, could be weeks. Could be never," Rebecca replied bitterly. "Sarah, I appreciate everything you're doing for me, but I'm starting to think my only real option is to disappear completely. New identity, no federal involvement. Just vanish and hope they eventually stop looking for me." Connor understood Rebecca's frustration, but she also knew that disappearing without federal protection would likely result in Rebecca's death within months. Criminal organizations like the Torino family had long memories and unlimited resources, and they would never stop hunting someone who had cost them millions of dollars in lost revenue. "Rebecca, I need you to trust the system for a little longer. We have the best investigators in the country working on this, and we will find whoever is responsible." But even as Connor spoke the words, she wasn't sure she believed them herself. If the leak was someone with high-level access to federal databases, identifying them could take months or years, and in the meantime, every witness in the protection program was at risk. Connor's secure phone rang again, this time with a call from Agent Lisa Park of the FBI's Internal Affairs Division. Park was leading the investigation into the WSERMS security breach, and her call could only mean one thing. They had identified a suspect. "Marshal Connor, we need to talk. Can you be in Denver tomorrow morning for a briefing?" "What did you find?" "We've identified the source of the leak, but the situation is more complicated than we initially thought. The person selling witness information isn't just a corrupt federal employee, they're a federal judge." Connor felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. A federal judge with access to witness information would have the highest levels of security clearance and would be virtually above suspicion. Moreover, a corrupt federal judge could potentially compromise dozens of cases beyond just the Witness Protection Program. Which judge? The Honorable Patricia Kellerman, U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. She's been presiding over organized crime cases for the past 8 years, and she's had access to witness information in over 200 federal prosecutions. The implications were staggering. If Judge Kellerman had been selling witness information for 8 years, she could have been responsible for the deaths of dozens of protected witnesses. Moreover, every case she had ever presided over would now be subject to review and potential retrial. How did you identify her? Financial forensics. Judge Kellerman has been making regular deposits to offshore accounts that total over $4 million in the past 3 years. The deposits correspond exactly with the timing of witness relocations in cases she presided over. Connor ended the call and sat down heavily in the chair across from Rebecca's apartment. A corrupt federal judge represented the worst possible scenario for the Witness Protection Program. Someone with legitimate access to sensitive information who could compromise witnesses without leaving any trace of unauthorized database access. The next morning, Connor flew to Denver to meet with Agent Park and review the evidence against Judge Kellerman. The FBI had been conducting surveillance on the judge for the past week, and the evidence was overwhelming. She's been selling witness information to at least 3 different criminal organizations, Park explained during the briefing. The Torino family in Chicago, the Kowalski organization in Detroit, and the Petrov Group out of New York. Each time a witness was relocated, Kellerman would provide the new location information within 48 hours. Connor studied the surveillance photographs of Judge Kellerman meeting with known criminals in remote locations around Chicago. The judge appeared relaxed and confident in the photos, suggesting that she had been operating without fear of detection for an extended period. What's the arrest plan? We're coordinating with the U.S. Attorney's Office to obtain a warrant for Judge Kellerman's arrest. But we have to be careful. Arresting a sitting federal judge requires approval from the highest levels of the Department of Justice. Connor nodded, understanding the political implications of arresting a federal judge. But she also understood that every day Judge Kellerman remained free was another day that protected witnesses remained at risk. What about the current witnesses who've been compromised? Rebecca Martinez and David Chen are still in hiding, and Judge Kellerman still has access to their location information. That's been handled. As of this morning, Judge Kellerman has been temporarily removed from all cases involving protected witnesses, and her access to WSERMS has been suspended. She doesn't know that we're investigating her, so she won't realize that her information source has been cut off. The arrest of Judge Patricia Kellerman took place at her home in an affluent suburb of Chicago, with FBI agents executing the warrant at 6 a.m. on a cold Thursday morning. Connor watched the arrest from a surveillance van parked across the street, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and disgust as the judge was led away in handcuffs. The judge's arrest made national headlines, with legal experts calling it one of the most serious breaches of judicial ethics in federal history. But for Connor, the real victory was the knowledge that Rebecca Martinez and David Chen were finally safe. Judge Kellerman's arrest also led to a comprehensive review of the Witness Protection Program's security procedures. New protocols were implemented to limit access to witness information, and additional oversight measures were put in place to detect potential security breaches. Rebecca Martinez was eventually relocated to a new city with a new identity, and she was able to resume something resembling a normal life. But the psychological trauma of being hunted for almost 2 years would stay with her forever. A reminder of the price that witnesses pay when they choose to cooperate with federal law enforcement. For Connor, the case served as a stark reminder that the greatest threats to the Witness Protection Program often came from within the federal system itself. Corruption, could exist at any level, and the people entrusted with protecting witnesses had to be watched as carefully as the criminals they were investigating. Judge Patricia Kellerman was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, becoming the first federal judge in history to be convicted of systematically selling witness information to criminal organizations. Her arrest led to the identification and prosecution of 17 other individuals involved in the conspiracy, including several court clerks, federal marshals, and organized crime figures. But the case also highlighted the ongoing vulnerabilities of the Witness Protection Program and the constant struggle to balance the need for information access with the imperative of maintaining security. For every Rebecca Martinez who survived to tell her story, there were others like Maria Santos and James Wilson who had paid the ultimate price for trusting in the federal government's promise of protection. The Witness Security Program continued to operate and protect thousands of witnesses each year, but the Kellerman case served as a permanent reminder that vigilance against corruption was just as important as protection against external threats. In the world of federal law enforcement, the enemy could be anyone, including the people sworn to uphold justice. Special Agent Emma Rodriguez stared at the wall of monitors in the FBI's Cyber Division headquarters, each screen displaying cascading lines of code that represented the digital equivalent of a crime scene. At 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in December, someone had just committed what appeared to be the largest cybercrime in U.S. history, and they had done it in a way that defied every established protocol for digital investigation. 17 major banking institutions had been simultaneously breached in a coordinated attack that had transferred over $847 million to accounts scattered across 43 countries. But what made the crime truly terrifying wasn't the amount of money stolen. It was the method used to steal it. The attackers had somehow gained access to the Federal Reserve's own transaction processing system, using the government's most secure financial network to authorize transfers that appeared completely legitimate to automated security systems. It was equivalent to robbing a bank by convincing the bank president to personally hand over the money. "Agent Rodriguez, we need you to look at this," called out Dr. Michael Chen, the FBI's lead digital forensics analyst. Chen had been with the Bureau for 12 years and had investigated everything from simple email fraud to sophisticated state-sponsored cyber attacks. But the expression on his face suggested that this case was unlike anything he had encountered before. Rodriguez walked over to Chen's workstation, where multiple screens displayed network traffic logs, authentication records, and financial transaction data. At first glance, the data looked normal, routine banking transactions being processed through standard security protocols. "What am I looking at, Mike?" "This is a record of the authentication sequence used to authorize the fraudulent transfers. Look at the timestamp data." Rodriguez studied the timestamps, initially seeing nothing unusual. Then the pattern became clear, and she felt her blood run cold. These transactions were authorized using authentication codes that weren't generated until 3 hours after the transfers were completed. Exactly. Someone didn't just hack into the Federal Reserve System, they hacked time itself. These transactions were processed using security codes that didn't exist when the transfers occurred. The implications were staggering. The Federal Reserve's transaction system was supposed to be unhackable, protected by multiple layers of encryption, biometric authentication, and real-time monitoring. But somehow, an unknown attacker had managed to manipulate the system's internal chronology to authorize transfers using future security codes. Rodriguez had been with the FBI's Cyber Division for 8 years, specializing in advanced persistent threats and state-sponsored cyber attacks. She had tracked Chinese military hackers, Russian intelligence operatives, and North Korean cyber terrorists. But this attack exhibited a level of sophistication that exceeded anything she had seen from any known hostile nation. Mike, I need you to walk me through exactly how this would be possible. In simple terms, how do you hack time? Chen pulled up a diagram of the Federal Reserve's network architecture, highlighting the various security systems that should have prevented unauthorized access. The Fed's system uses a distributed authentication protocol that generates new security codes every 30 seconds. These codes are synchronized across multiple servers using atomic clock precision. In theory, it's impossible to predict what the codes will be more than a few seconds in advance. So, how did someone predict codes that wouldn't be generated for 3 hours? They didn't predict them. They manipulated the atomic clock references that the system uses to synchronize the code generation. By introducing micro-delays in the time synchronization protocol, they were able to make the system think it was generating codes for the current time, when it was actually generating codes for 3 hours in the future. Rodriguez felt a headache beginning to form as she tried to comprehend the technical complexity of the attack. Who has the capability to manipulate atomic clock signals? Officially, the U.S. government, the Russian government, the Chinese government, and maybe a handful of private defense contractors with access to satellite networks. Unofficially, anyone with about $50 million and a willingness to risk starting World War III. The investigation's first break came from an unexpected source. A software engineer at a financial services company in Manhattan who had noticed irregularities in his company's transaction logs several hours before the main attack occurred. Derek Phillips worked for Morrison Financial Services, a mid-sized firm that specialized in high-frequency trading algorithms. At 11:30 p.m. the night before the Federal Reserve attack, Phillips had been running routine diagnostics on his company's trading systems when he noticed something unusual. "Agent Rodriguez, you need to see this," Phillips said during a secure video conference from his company's offices. About 3 hours before the Fed attack, someone was using our systems to test microtransactions. Tiny amounts, less than $1 each, but they were being processed through authentication protocols I'd never seen before. Rodriguez leaned forward, her interest piqued. What made these protocols unusual? They were using time-shifted authentication codes. The system would generate a code, but then verify it against a timestamp that was several hours in the future. At first, I thought it was a bug in our software, but now I'm wondering if someone was using our system to test their attack methodology. Phillips shared his screen, showing Rodriguez a series of transaction logs that documented the test attacks. Each microtransaction had been processed using authentication codes that corresponded to timestamps several hours in the future. A perfect small-scale rehearsal for the Federal Reserve attack. "Derek, I need you to send me every piece of data you have about these test transactions. Network logs, authentication records, anything that might help us trace the source." But as Rodriguez reviewed Phillips's data, she realized that the attackers had been even more sophisticated than she initially thought. The test transactions hadn't been random. They had been carefully designed to map the Federal Reserve's authentication system by triggering responses from backup servers and emergency protocols. The attackers had essentially used Morrison Financial Services systems to conduct reconnaissance on the Federal Reserve's network, learning systems' weaknesses without ever directly accessing the government's computers. Rodriguez's secure phone rang with a call from the Assistant Director Sarah Walsh at FBI headquarters. "Emma, we just got word from the Treasury Department. This attack isn't just about stealing money. It's about destabilizing the entire global financial system. The attackers left behind a message buried in the Federal Reserve's transaction logs." Rodriguez felt her stomach drop. Cyber attacks that included messages were typically the work of terrorists or state actors with political motivations, rather than simple financial gain. What does the message say? 3 words: the market falls. Emma, we think this attack was designed to demonstrate that the Federal Reserve's security can be breached at will. If that information becomes public, it could trigger a global financial panic. The implications were terrifying. The global economy depended on confidence in the security and stability of major financial institutions. If investors believed that the Federal Reserve itself could be hacked, it could trigger massive sell-offs, bank runs, and economic collapse. Have we identified any suspects? That's where things get complicated. The attack appears to have been launched from servers located in 12 different countries, but our initial analysis suggests that all of these servers are compromised systems belonging to innocent third parties. We're dealing with someone who has the resources to compromise infrastructure across multiple continents. Rodriguez ended the call and turned back to Dr. Chen, who had been analyzing the attack's digital fingerprints while she spoke with Assistant Director Walsh. Mike, what do we know about the attack's origin point? That's the problem. There is no origin point. The attack was launched simultaneously from compromised servers in the United States, Russia, China, Germany, Brazil, and 7 other countries. Each server was used to process a small portion of the overall attack, making it virtually impossible to trace the true source. Chen pulled up a world map showing the locations of the compromised servers, with lines connecting them to illustrate the attack's distributed nature. Emma, this level of coordination suggests we're dealing with either a state-sponsored group with virtually unlimited resources or a private organization with access to military-grade cyber warfare capabilities. Rodriguez studied the map, trying to identify patterns that might reveal the attacker's true location or identity. But the more she learned about the attack's sophistication, the more she realized they were facing an adversary unlike any the FBI had encountered before. What about the stolen money? Have we been able to trace any of the $847 million? That's where things get even stranger. The money was transferred to accounts in 43 countries, but within 6 hours of the attack, all of the funds were transferred again to a single account in the Cayman Islands. Then, 12 hours later, the entire amount was donated to various international charities. Rodriguez felt a chill run down her spine. Cyber criminals who stole nearly $1 billion and then gave it all to charity weren't motivated by financial gain. They were making a statement. Mike, I want you to analyze every line of code that was used in this attack. Look for signature patterns, coding styles, anything that might help us identify who wrote this malware. But as Chen began his analysis, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something fundamental about the attack. The technical sophistication, the coordinated timing, the symbolic message. Everything suggested that this wasn't a random criminal act, but part of a larger plan. Her secure phone rang again, this time with a call from Agent David Kim at the FBI's San Francisco field office. Agent Rodriguez, we might have found something. 3 days ago, a computer programmer named Alex Chen, no relation to Dr. Chen, was found dead in his apartment in Palo Alto. Initially ruled a suicide, but we're now thinking it might be connected to your cyber attack. Rodriguez felt her pulse quicken. What's the connection? Alex Chen was a former NSA programmer who specialized in time synchronization protocols for classified government networks. According to his former colleagues, he was one of only a handful of people in the world who understood how to manipulate atomic clock references without detection. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. Alex Chen's expertise in time synchronization protocols would have been essential for carrying out the Federal Reserve attack, but his death suggested that he might have been eliminated to prevent him from revealing the attacker's identity. David, I need you to secure Alex Chen's apartment and all of his computer equipment. If he was involved in planning this attack, there might be evidence that could lead us to his co-conspirators. Rodriguez booked the next flight to San Francisco, bringing Dr. Chen with her to analyze any digital evidence they might find. During the 3-hour flight, she reviewed Alex Chen's background file, looking for connections that might explain his involvement in the cyber attack. Alex Chen had worked for the NSA for 7 years before leaving the agency under circumstances that weren't entirely clear from his personnel file. He had subsequently worked for several private cybersecurity firms before starting his own consulting company that specialized in temporal security protocols, exactly the kind of expertise needed to manipulate the Federal Reserve's time-based authentication system. But what troubled Rodriguez most was Alex Chen's financial records. Despite running a successful consulting business, he had been living in a modest apartment and driving a 10-year-old car. There was no evidence that he had been paid large sums of money for participating in the cyber attack, which suggested that his motivation might have been ideological rather than financial. The Palo Alto Police Department had cordoned off Alex Chen's apartment pending the FBI's arrival, but Rodriguez could see immediately that the scene had been professionally cleaned. The apartment was too tidy, too sterile, lacking the personal chaos that typically characterized a programmer's living space. "This place has been sanitized," Dr. Chen observed as they entered the apartment. "Someone went through here and removed anything that might be incriminating." Rodriguez nodded, noting the absence of personal computers, external hard drives, or any other digital storage devices. But as they searched the apartment more thoroughly, she noticed something that the cleaners had missed: a small USB drive taped to the underside of a kitchen drawer. "Mike, I need you to analyze this immediately, but be careful. If Alex Chen was involved in the Federal Reserve attack, this drive might contain malware designed to compromise our investigation." Dr. Chen connected the USB drive to an isolated analysis system that was completely disconnected from any networks. After running multiple security scans, he began examining the drive's contents. "Emma, you need to see this. The drive contains source code for a program called ChronoShift, software designed to manipulate time synchronization protocols in real time without detection." Rodriguez looked over Chen's shoulder as he displayed the source code. Even with her limited programming knowledge, she could see that the software was incredibly sophisticated, incorporating advanced mathematical algorithms and encryption protocols. "Can you tell if this software was used in the Federal Reserve attack?" "Give me a few minutes to compare the code signatures." Chen ran the ChronoShift source code through a comparative analysis program that could identify similarities with the malware used in the Federal Reserve attack. The results were conclusive. ChronoShift was the foundation for the Federal Reserve attack, but it had been modified and enhanced by additional programmers beyond Alex Chen's capabilities. "Emma, Alex Chen created the basic framework for the attack, but someone else took his code and weaponized it. The modifications show a level of sophistication that suggests involvement by a state intelligence agency." Rodriguez felt the investigation taking a darker turn. If foreign intelligence services were involved in the Federal Reserve attack, it raised the possibility that they were dealing with an act of cyber warfare rather than simple criminal activity. "Mike, can you identify which intelligence agency might have made these modifications?" The coding style and encryption protocols match techniques used by Unit 61398, a Chinese military cyber warfare unit. "But Emma, there's something strange about the attribution. The Chinese signatures are almost too obvious, like someone wanted us to think this was a Chinese operation." Rodriguez's phone rang with a call from Agent Kim, who had been investigating Alex Chen's background while they analyzed his computer files. "Agent Rodriguez, I've been talking to Alex Chen's former NSA colleagues, and they've told me something interesting. About 6 months ago, Chen approached several of them asking questions about federal financial networks and time synchronization vulnerabilities. He claimed he was working on a research project for an academic institution. Which institution? That's the problem. The institution doesn't exist. Chen told them he was working for the Institute for Advanced Cybersecurity Research at Stanford University, but Stanford has no such institute. Rodriguez felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to align. Alex Chen had been recruited by unknown parties to develop software for attacking federal financial systems, but he had been lied to about the purpose and scope of the operation. David, did Chen's colleagues mention anything else about his behavior in the months before his death? They said he had become increasingly paranoid, claiming that he was being followed and that his phone was being monitored. One colleague said Chen mentioned that he had discovered his research was being used for something much bigger than he had agreed to. Rodriguez realized that Alex Chen had likely been murdered not to prevent him from revealing the attacker's identity, but to prevent him from exposing the true scope of the operation. The Federal Reserve attack might have been just the beginning of a larger campaign against U.S. financial infrastructure. Mike, I need you to analyze the ChronoShift source code for any hidden functions or capabilities that might not have been used in the Federal Reserve attack. Dr. Chen spent the next 2 hours conducting a line-by-line analysis of Alex Chen's software, looking for dormant functions or capabilities that might reveal the attacker's future plans. Emma, I found something. ChronoShift contains code for attacking not just the Federal Reserve, but also the SWIFT International Banking Network, the New York Stock Exchange, and the NASDAQ. This software was designed to simultaneously attack every major financial institution in the United States. The implications were staggering. If the attackers had the capability to simultaneously disrupt all major U.S. financial institutions, they could trigger an economic collapse that would make the 2008 financial crisis look minor by comparison. Have they already deployed attacks against these other targets? Not yet, but the code is ready for immediate deployment. Emma, we're looking at a cyber weapon that could destroy the U.S. economy in a matter of hours. Rodriguez immediately contacted Assistant Director Walsh to brief her on the discovery. The FBI needed to coordinate with Treasury, Homeland Security, and the intelligence community to protect every major financial institution from potential attack. But as she made the calls to coordinate the response, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. The Federal Reserve attack had been designed not just to steal money or demonstrate capability, but to force law enforcement to discover ChronoShift and realize the scope of the threat. Mike, what if the Federal Reserve attack wasn't the real objective? What if it was designed to make us find Alex Chen's software and realize that the entire financial system is vulnerable? Dr. Chen considered this possibility for several moments before responding. If that's true, then someone wanted us to know about the threat. But why would attackers reveal their capabilities unless they were planning to use them immediately? Rodriguez's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Federal Reserve was a demonstration. Stock market closes in 48 hours permanently unless you meet our demands. Check your secure email for instructions. The message confirmed Rodriguez's worst fears. The Federal Reserve attack had been a proof of concept, designed to demonstrate the attacker's capability to manipulate critical financial infrastructure. Now, they were threatening to use that capability to destroy the U.S. stock market unless their demands were met. Rodriguez accessed her secure FBI email account and found a message containing a video file. The video showed a masked figure sitting in front of multiple computer screens, with financial data streaming across the displays. Agent Rodriguez, by now you have discovered the ChronoShift software and understand our capabilities. The Federal Reserve attack was a demonstration of what we can accomplish when we choose to act. In 48 hours, we will deploy the full version of ChronoShift against every major financial institution in the United States, unless our demands are met. The masked figure paused, allowing the magnitude of the threat to sink in before continuing. Our demands are simple. The immediate release of 12 individuals currently held in federal custody on charges related to cybercrime. You will find their names and locations in the attached file. You have 48 hours to comply, or the U.S. economy will cease to exist. Rodriguez felt her blood run cold as she reviewed the list of demanded prisoners. The 12 individuals were all highly skilled hackers who had been convicted of cyber attacks against government and financial targets. Their release would put some of the world's most dangerous cyber criminals back on the streets. But the alternative, the complete collapse of the U.S. financial system, was potentially catastrophic. Rodriguez realized that she was facing a decision that could determine the economic future of the entire country. Mike, is there any way to defend against a ChronoShift attack if we know it's coming? Theoretically, yes. If we can modify the time synchronization protocols used by financial institutions, we can make their systems immune to chronological manipulation. But Emma, we'd need access to every major financial network in the country, and we'd have less than 48 hours to implement the changes. Rodriguez made a decision that would define the rest of her career. Rather than negotiate with cyber terrorists or risk the collapse of the financial system, she was going to coordinate the largest cybersecurity operation in U.S. history. Mike, I need you to contact every cybersecurity expert the FBI has ever worked with. We're going to patch every financial network in the country before the attackers can deploy ChronoShift. The next 47 hours were a blur of coordination calls, emergency meetings, and round-the-clock technical work. Rodriguez worked with teams from the FBI, NSA, Homeland Security, and private cybersecurity firms to identify and patch vulnerabilities in hundreds of financial networks. The operation required the cooperation of bank executives, stock exchange officials, and government regulators who had to authorize unprecedented access to their most sensitive systems. But as the deadline approached, Rodriguez realized they had succeeded in protecting the vast majority of critical financial infrastructure. When the 48-hour deadline passed without incident, Rodriguez allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The attackers had attempted to deploy ChronoShift against multiple targets, but their attacks had been ineffective against the patched systems. Within weeks, the investigation led to the arrest of 17 individuals in 6 countries, including several members of a Russian cyber warfare unit that had been operating under the cover of a private consulting firm. The international cooperation required to track down the conspirators set new precedents for cybercrime investigation and prosecution. Alex Chen was posthumously credited with helping to prevent a catastrophic attack on the U.S. financial system, despite his unwitting role in developing the attack software. His sacrifice served as a reminder that even those who became involved in cybercrime could ultimately choose to do the right thing. For Rodriguez, the case highlighted the evolving nature of cyber threats and the need for constant vigilance in protecting critical infrastructure. The ChronoShift attack had demonstrated that cyber criminals were becoming increasingly sophisticated, but it had also shown that coordinated defense efforts could successfully protect against even the most advanced threats. The case became a landmark in federal cybercrime prosecution, leading to new protocols for defending financial infrastructure and establishing new levels of cooperation between government agencies and private sector organizations. But for Rodriguez, the real victory was simpler. The U.S. economy was still functioning, and millions of Americans would never know how close they had come to financial catastrophe. Special Agent Marcus Webb had been tracking international terrorist networks for 11 years, but he had never seen intelligence that made his hand shake until he opened the classified briefing file at 6:23 a.m. on a frigid January morning in the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force headquarters in New York City. The file contained intercepted communications between 3 individuals whose names appeared on every terrorist watch list maintained by Western intelligence agencies: Khalid al-Rashid, a former chemical engineer turned bomb maker; Yusuf Hassan, a logistics coordinator for multiple terrorist cells; and Dr. Amira Qasemi, a microbiologist who had disappeared from a CDC laboratory in Atlanta 6 months earlier. But it wasn't the identities of the communicators that made Webb's blood run cold. It was the content of their conversations. "The shipment arrives at Newark on Tuesday," al-Rashid's voice said in Arabic, translated by NSA linguists. 12 containers, each weighing approximately 40 pounds. Dr. Qasemi confirms that the dispersal mechanism will be effective within a 3-mile radius. Webb read the transcript twice before the full implications sank in. 3-mile radius, 12 containers, a microbiologist with access to biological weapons research. The terrorist cell was planning to deploy some kind of biological weapon in the New York metropolitan area, and they had less than 5 days to prevent it. Webb's secure phone rang immediately, displaying the caller ID of Director James Harrison at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. "Webb, please tell me you've read the intercept incorrectly." "I wish I could, sir. We're looking at a coordinated biological weapons attack planned for sometime next week. 12 devices, each capable of contaminating a 3-mile area with an unknown biological agent." Director Harrison's silence stretched for several seconds before he responded. "Marcus, I'm authorizing the immediate activation of Operation BioShield. You'll have access to every resource the federal government can provide, but you need to understand something. If this attack succeeds, we're looking at potential casualties in the hundreds of thousands." Operation BioShield was the FBI's most classified counterterrorism protocol, designed to respond to threats involving weapons of mass destruction. Webb had trained for BioShield scenarios, but he had never imagined he would need to implement them in response to a real threat. "Sir, what do we know about Dr. Amira Qasemi's research at the CDC? That's classified above your current clearance level. But I can tell you that her disappearance 6 months ago triggered a comprehensive review of all biological weapons research in the United States. Agent Webb, the material she had access to could kill more people than a nuclear weapon." Webb felt the weight of the investigation settling on his shoulders. In his 11 years with the Bureau, he had successfully prevented 17 terrorist attacks, but none had involved biological weapons. Chemical and conventional explosives could be detected and neutralized, but biological agents were invisible, undetectable, and potentially unstoppable once released. "Director Harrison, I need immediate access to Dr. Qasemi's research files and a complete briefing on the biological agents she was working with." "I'll have a CDC liaison meet you within the hour." "Agent Webb, I want you to understand something. This investigation is now classified at the highest levels of national security. The potential for mass panic means that information about this threat cannot be shared outside a very small circle of cleared personnel." Webb understood the implications. If news of a potential biological weapons attack leaked to the media, it could trigger mass evacuations, economic collapse, and social chaos that might be more destructive than the attack itself. The CDC liaison arrived at the FBI building exactly 57 minutes later. Dr. Patricia Chen was a virologist with 23 years of experience in biological weapons research, and her grim expression suggested that she understood the severity of the threat they were facing. "Agent Webb, Dr. Kasemi was working on a classified project involving airborne transmission of modified viral agents. I can't provide specific details about the research without additional clearances, but I can tell you that the agents she had access to were designed for maximum lethality and environmental persistence. Webb felt his stomach clench as he processed the implications. Environmental persistence meant that any area contaminated by Dr. Kasemi's biological agents could remain deadly for weeks or months, effectively turning major population centers into uninhabitable zones. Dr. Chen, what kind of dispersal mechanism would be required to contaminate a 3-mile radius? With the agents Dr. Kasemi was working with, a relatively simple aerosol system would be sufficient. Something as basic as a modified crop duster or even a series of strategically placed devices could contaminate huge areas with minimal technical expertise. Webb reviewed the intercepted communications again, focusing on the timeline and logistics. The terrorist cell had mentioned containers arriving at Newark, which suggested they were importing components for the biological weapons rather than manufacturing them domestically. Dr. Chen, if Dr. Kasemi has been working with this terrorist cell for 6 months, what would they be capable of producing? Agent Webb, with her knowledge and access to laboratory equipment, they could potentially produce enough biological agent to contaminate the entire New York metropolitan area. We're talking about millions of potential casualties. Webb's secure phone rang with a call from Agent Lisa Martinez at the FBI's Newark field office. "Marcus, we might have found something. Customs flagged 12 containers that arrived from Syria this morning. The manifest lists them as containing medical research equipment, but the importers are using shell companies with no traceable ownership." Webb felt his pulse accelerate. 12 containers from Syria, arriving exactly when the intercepted communications had indicated. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. "Lisa, I need those containers isolated immediately. Don't let anyone near them until we can get hazmat teams on site." "Already done. The containers are in a secure area of the port, and we've established a quarantine perimeter. But Marcus, there's something else. The containers are refrigerated, which suggests whatever's inside needs to be kept at specific temperatures. Refrigerated containers meant that the terrorist cell was transporting biological agents that required careful environmental controls to remain viable. Webb realized that they were dealing with sophisticated biological weapons rather than crude chemical explosives. "Lisa, I'm mobilizing a full hazmat response team. Don't let anyone enter the quarantine area until we arrive." The drive to Newark took 47 minutes through heavy New York traffic, but Webb used the time to coordinate with multiple federal agencies. The Department of Homeland Security was mobilizing their biological response teams. The CDC was preparing to analyze any recovered biological agents, and the Pentagon was placing military assets on standby in case the situation escalated beyond civilian law enforcement capabilities. The port of Newark had been transformed into a secure facility by the time Webb arrived. FBI agents, customs officials, and hazmat teams had established multiple security perimeters around the suspect containers, while overhead drones provided aerial surveillance of the entire area. Agent Martinez met Webb at the outer security perimeter, her expression grim as she briefed him on the situation. "Marcus, we've been monitoring the containers with remote sensors for the past 2 hours. The interior temperature is being maintained at exactly 4 degrees Celsius, which is consistent with the storage requirements for most biological weapons." Webb studied the 12 containers through high-powered binoculars, noting that they appeared identical to thousands of other shipping containers that moved through Newark every day. The terrorist cell had disguised their biological weapons as routine commercial cargo. What do we know about the shell companies that imported these containers? The companies were established 3 months ago, using fraudulent documentation and untraceable financial transfers. But we've identified the individuals who signed for the container's release. They match the physical descriptions of Khalid al-Rashid and Yusuf Hassan. Webb felt the investigation accelerating toward a critical moment. The terrorist cell was already in the New York area, and they had successfully imported their biological weapons. The only question was when and where they planned to deploy them. Lisa, have we established surveillance on the individuals who signed for the containers? We're tracking them through facial recognition cameras throughout the metropolitan area. As of 20 minutes ago, they were seen entering a warehouse facility in Queens. Webb made a decision that would define the rest of the investigation. Rather than wait for additional intelligence, they were going to raid the warehouse immediately and attempt to capture the terrorist cell before they could deploy their biological weapons. Lisa, I want tactical teams surrounding that warehouse within 30 minutes. Full hazmat protocols. No one enters without biological protection. The warehouse was located in an industrial area of Queens, surrounded by similar buildings that provided perfect cover for a terrorist operation. As FBI tactical teams took their positions, Webb could see through thermal imaging that at least 6 individuals were inside the building, working with equipment that generated significant heat signatures. All units, this is Agent Webb. We're dealing with a confirmed biological weapons threat. Priority is preventing deployment of WMD devices. If anyone attempts to release biological agents, you are authorized to use lethal force. The raid began at exactly 4:17 p.m., with tactical teams entering the warehouse through 4 different access points simultaneously. Webb followed the lead team through the main entrance, his breathing apparatus making every movement feel labored and artificial. The interior of the warehouse had been converted into a sophisticated laboratory, complete with centrifuges, incubation chambers, and aerosol dispersal devices. 12 aluminum containers sat in the center of the space, each connected to electronic timers and spray mechanisms. FBI, everyone on the ground, now! 3 of the terrorists immediately surrendered, dropping to their knees with their hands raised. But Khalid al-Rashid and Yusuf Hassan ran toward the biological weapons containers, apparently intending to manually trigger the dispersal devices. Webb drew his sidearm and fired 3 shots, striking al-Rashid in the center of mass and dropping him before he could reach the containers. Agent Martinez simultaneously neutralized Hassan with a precise shot to the head. But as the tactical team secured the warehouse, Webb noticed that one person was missing from the scene. Dr. Amira Qasemi was nowhere to be found. All units, we have 1 suspect unaccounted for. Dr. Amira Qasemi, female, approximately 40 years old, extremely dangerous. She has the knowledge to deploy biological weapons without the equipment we just secured. Webb's worst fears were confirmed when they discovered Dr. Qasemi's research notes in the warehouse laboratory. She had been developing a simplified dispersal method that could be deployed using common household items and small quantities of biological agent. Lisa, Dr. Qasemi could have enough biological agent to contaminate multiple city blocks using nothing more than a garden sprayer and a small amount of the modified virus. The manhunt for Dr. Qasemi mobilized every law enforcement agency in the New York metropolitan area. Facial recognition cameras, cell phone tracking, and human intelligence networks were deployed to locate her before she could deploy her remaining biological weapons. But as the hours passed without any confirmed sightings, Webb realized that Dr. Qasemi had disappeared into one of the most densely populated areas in the world, carrying enough biological weapon to kill thousands of people. The break in the case came from an unexpected source: a taxi driver who called 911 to report a passenger who had been acting suspiciously and carrying what appeared to be laboratory equipment. She was asking me to drive to Central Park. the taxi driver reported, but she kept checking her watch and looking at some kind of electronic device. When I asked her about it, she got very nervous and insisted that I drop her off at the nearest subway station. Central Park. Webb felt his blood run cold as he realized Dr. Kasemi's target. On a warm January afternoon, Central Park would be filled with thousands of visitors, joggers, families, tourists, street performers. An aerosol release of biological weapons in Central Park could contaminate hundreds of people who would then spread the agent throughout the city before anyone realized an attack had occurred. All units converge on Central Park immediately. We're looking for a Middle Eastern woman, approximately 40 years old, carrying what appears to be laboratory equipment. She is armed with biological weapons and should be considered extremely dangerous. The search for Dr. Kasemi in Central Park required coordination between the FBI, NYPD, Parks Department, and Emergency Medical Services. Hundreds of law enforcement officers spread throughout the park, using thermal imaging and chemical detection equipment to locate signs of biological weapons. Webb coordinated the search from a command post near the park's main entrance, monitoring radio communications from dozens of search teams while watching thermal satellite feeds on multiple screens. Agent Webb, this is Team 7. We have a possible contact near the Bethesda fountain. Female matching the suspect's description, carrying a large backpack and what appears to be a spray device. Webb felt his heart rate accelerate as he watched the thermal images on his screen. A lone figure was positioned near one of the park's most popular gathering spots, and she appeared to be assembling some kind of dispersal device. Team 7, do not approach until backup teams are in position. If she releases biological agents, we need containment protocols ready immediately. Webb monitored the tactical positioning as 6 different FBI teams surrounded Dr. Kasemi's location. Emergency medical teams stood by with biological decontamination equipment, while CDC specialists prepared to analyze any released agents. All teams, this is Agent Webb. On my mark, we're going to approach simultaneously from 6 directions. Dr. Kasemi is armed with biological weapons that could kill thousands of people. We have one chance to stop her before she can deploy those weapons. The final confrontation lasted less than 30 seconds. As FBI agents approached from multiple directions, Dr. Kasemi realized she was surrounded and made a desperate attempt to trigger her dispersal device. Webb personally took the shot that ended Dr. Kasemi's life, firing a single round that struck her in the head and killed her instantly. The biological weapons device fell from her hands and shattered on the concrete pathway, releasing a small cloud of aerosol that was immediately contained by hazmat teams. The subsequent analysis revealed that Dr. Kasemi had been carrying enough modified viral agent to potentially kill over 10,000 people if dispersed in a crowded area. Her death had prevented one of the most catastrophic terrorist attacks in U.S. history. The investigation's conclusion required extensive decontamination of the warehouse laboratory, the port containers, and the area around Bethesda Fountain where Dr. Kasemi had been killed. CDC specialists spent weeks analyzing the biological agents to ensure that no contamination had spread to the broader population. Webb spent the following months testifying before congressional committees about the investigation and the threat posed by biological terrorism. His testimony led to enhanced security protocols at research laboratories and improved coordination between law enforcement and public health agencies. But for Webb, the real impact of the case was more personal. He had prevented a terrorist attack that could have killed more people than September 11th, but he would never forget how close Dr. Kasemi had come to succeeding. The investigation served as a permanent reminder that terrorist threats were constantly evolving, and that law enforcement had to remain vigilant against threats that could barely be imagined. The case also highlighted the critical importance of international intelligence cooperation in preventing terrorism. The intercepted communications that had initiated the investigation had been gathered through a joint operation involving the NSA, CIA, and intelligence agencies from 3 allied nations. Dr. Amira Qasimi's research notes were ultimately used to develop improved countermeasures against biological weapons, turning her knowledge of death into tools for saving lives. Her work had been intended to kill thousands, but in the end, it contributed to protecting millions from similar threats. For the families who visited Central Park that afternoon and never knew how close they had come to death, the case remained a secret. But for Webb and the hundreds of law enforcement officers who had participated in the investigation, it served as a reminder of the constant, invisible war being fought to protect innocent people from those who sought to destroy them.